Chapter 1. The Dream Interview. Mark took a deep breath as he stood in front of the glass doors of Luna Coffee, one of the busiest cafes in town. The warm aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air as customers chatted at small wooden tables. Through the large windows he could see baristas moving quickly behind the counter, preparing drinks with smooth precision. It was a big day for him. After weeks of searching for a job, he finally had an interview at a well-known coffee shop. He had worked in a small local cafe before, so he felt confident in his experience. But deep down, he was nervous. He needed this job. Rent was due soon, and his savings were running low. He adjusted his shirt, took another deep breath, and stepped inside. The cafe was even busier than he expected. The sound of milk frothing, cups clinking, and orders being called out created a lively atmosphere. A few other candidates were waiting near the back, dressed in their best outfits. Mark approached the counter and spoke to a friendly-looking barista. "Hi, I have an interview scheduled for 3 p.m., he said, trying to sound calm. The barista nodded and pointed toward a small seating area. "You can wait over there. The manager will call you soon." Mark thanked her and sat down. His hands felt slightly sweaty as he wiped them on his jeans. He watched as the other candidates scrolled through their phones or tapped their fingers nervously on the table. After a few minutes, a tall man with neatly combed hair and a confident smile stepped out from the back. He glanced at a clipboard and looked around. "Mark?" Mark quickly stood up. "Yes, that's me." The manager smiled and extended his hand. "Hi, I'm Daniel. Nice to meet you. Come with me." Mark shook his hand firmly and followed him to a small office in the back. His heart was beating fast, but he reminded himself to stay calm. It was time for the interview. Chapter 2. The First Impression. Mark stepped into the small office, noticing the neat arrangement of papers on the desk and the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. A window let in soft afternoon light, making the space feel welcoming but professional. Daniel gestured toward a chair. "Please have a seat." Mark sat down, keeping his posture straight. He wanted to make a good impression. "So Mark," Daniel began, flipping through his notes, "I see you have experience working at a cafe before." "Yes," Mark replied with a nod. "I worked as a barista for almost 2 years at a local coffee shop." Daniel smiled. "That's great. Can you tell me about your daily tasks there?" Mark relaxed a little. This was familiar territory. "I made coffee, prepared drinks, handled the cash register, and helped customers with their orders. I also cleaned the equipment and kept the cafe organized." "Sounds like you have a solid background," Daniel said, tapping his pen against the desk. "How do you handle busy hours?" "I stay calm and focused," Mark answered. "I know customers don't like waiting, so I always try to work fast while keeping the quality high." Daniel nodded in approval. "Good. We get a lot of customers, especially in the mornings. Teamwork is also very important here. How do you work with others?" Mark smiled. "I work well in a team. I like helping my coworkers and making sure we all keep things running smoothly." Daniel leaned back in his chair, seeming pleased. The interview was going well. Mark felt more at ease. He could do this. Then, Daniel glanced at his notes again and looked up. "One more thing," he said. "Here at Luna Coffee, we have a lot of international customers. So we require all our staff to have at least basic English skills." Mark's heartbeat quickened. Daniel gave a reassuring smile. Nothing too complicated. Just simple conversations with customers. "So let's do a quick part of the interview in English." Mark swallowed hard. His hands felt cold. He had studied English before, but speaking it in a job interview, that was something he wasn't prepared for. Chapter 3: The Unexpected Challenge. Mark's mind went blank. His pulse pounded in his ears as he tried to process what Daniel had just said. A part of the interview in English? He wasn't terrible at English. He had studied it in school and knew some basic phrases. But speaking it in a real conversation, especially under pressure, was completely different. Daniel noticed Mark's hesitation and gave him an encouraging nod. "Don't worry. Just do your best." Mark forced himself to take a breath. "Okay, stay calm. You can do this." Daniel smiled. "Let's start with something simple. Can you describe your previous work experience?" Mark felt his throat tighten. He knew the words, but suddenly, they seemed far away, like they were trapped in a locked room in his mind. After a long second, he finally spoke. I work." "No, I worked, at a coffee shop." Daniel waited patiently. Mark clenched his fists under the table. "Come on, think. I made coffee and, other drinks. I took orders, cash, register, and clean." His words came out slow and broken. He could feel his face getting warm. Daniel gave him an encouraging smile. "Good. You worked at a coffee shop, made drinks, took orders, and used the cash register. That's exactly what I wanted to hear." Mark exhaled, relieved that Daniel had understood him. But he still felt embarrassed. He wanted to say more, to sound more natural, but his mind wasn't cooperating. Daniel continued. "And how do you feel about working with customers?" Mark hesitated. He wanted to say something like, "I enjoy working with people, and I always try to be friendly and helpful." But instead, what came out was, "I like people. I help. I smile. Customers. Happy." His English sounded like a child's. He gritted his teeth, frustrated with himself. Daniel, however, didn't seem bothered. He nodded thoughtfully and wrote something on his notes. "That's great, Mark. It's clear that you know the basics. You just need a little more practice speaking." Mark managed a small, nervous smile. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "One last question. If a customer speaks English and asks, 'What do you recommend?' how would you answer?" Mark's chest tightened again. He quickly translated the question in his head. He had heard this phrase before. Customers asked this all the time. He just needed to find the right words. After a few seconds, he said, "I recommend, caramel latte. It is very good." Daniel grinned. "Perfect. See? You're doing better already." Mark wasn't sure if he believed that, but he appreciated Daniel's kindness. He let out a slow breath, still feeling nervous, but also slightly more confident. Chapter 4. Overcoming the Fear. Mark's heart was still racing, but he forced himself to focus. He had made it through the first few questions, even if his English wasn't perfect. But deep down, a part of him still felt frustrated. He wanted to speak smoothly, to sound natural, but instead, every sentence felt like a struggle. Daniel noticed Mark's tension and gave him a reassuring smile. "You're doing well, Mark. The important thing is that you're trying. That's what really matters." Mark nodded, taking a slow breath. "Let's keep going," Daniel continued. "What would you say if a customer orders a drink, but we don't have it?" Mark thought for a moment, trying to form a clear response. He pictured himself behind the counter, a customer asking for something unavailable. He knew the words he needed, but putting them together correctly was another challenge. He hesitated before saying, "Sorry, we no have it." Daniel raised an eyebrow but kept his expression kind. "Almost. Try this. I'm sorry, we don't have that right now. Would you like to try something else?" Mark repeated slowly, "I'm sorry. We don't have that right now. Would you like to try something else?" Daniel nodded. "Great. That sounds much better." Mark felt a small sense of accomplishment. It wasn't perfect, but at least he was improving. Daniel leaned back slightly. "Okay, let's try one more. Imagine a customer speaks very fast, and you don't understand. What do you do?" Mark knew this situation all too well. It had happened before. He would catch a few words, but the rest sounded like a blur. His instinct was always to panic, but he knew that wasn't the right approach. He took a deep breath and said, Sorry, can you say again, slow?" Daniel smiled. "That works, but let's make it a little smoother. Try this. I'm sorry, could you repeat that more slowly?" Mark repeated carefully. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that more slowly?" "Excellent," Daniel said. "That's a very useful phrase. And if you still don't understand, you can say, 'I just want to make sure I got that right.' Could you explain it again? Mark repeated the sentence, feeling slightly more confident each time. Daniel closed his notebook. You see? You're improving already. The key is practice. The more you use English, the easier it will get. Mark exhaled, realizing that the nervous feeling in his chest had started to fade. He wasn't perfect, but he was learning. And for the first time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he could actually do this. Chapter 5. A Newfound Confidence. Mark sat up a little straighter in his chair. The nervousness was still there, but it no longer felt overwhelming. He had made it through the English part of the interview, maybe not perfectly, but he had done it. Daniel gave him an approving nod. All right, Mark. That's all for now. Do you have any questions for me? Mark hesitated for a moment, then decided to take a chance. Yes. What can I do to speak better? Daniel smiled, clearly impressed. That's a great question. The best way to improve is to use English every day. Don't be afraid of making mistakes, that's how you learn. Watch movies with subtitles, listen to music, and try to practice speaking whenever you can. Mark nodded, absorbing the advice. And one more thing, Daniel continued. Confidence is key. Even if your English isn't perfect, speak with confidence. People will understand you better if you believe in yourself. Mark let those words sink in. Speak with confidence. It sounded simple, but he realized that his biggest problem wasn't just the words. It was his fear of getting them wrong. Daniel stood up and extended his hand. Thank you for coming in today, Mark. We'll let you know our decision soon. Mark shook his hand firmly. Thank you for, the opportunity. Daniel grinned. See? You're already improving. Mark chuckled, feeling a sense of relief. He walked out of the office and back into the busy cafe, where the scent of coffee filled the air. As he stepped outside, he took a deep breath. Maybe learning English wasn't as impossible as he had thought. Maybe he just needed to keep going. And he would. Now that we've followed Mark's journey, let's take a closer look at the most important English phrases and lessons from his interview. 1. Talking about past work experience. In an interview, it's important to talk about your past jobs clearly. Mark struggled a little at first, but here's the correct way to talk about your experience. I work coffee shop. I make coffee. I take orders. I worked at a coffee shop. I made coffee and took orders. Remember, use the past tense when talking about previous jobs. 2. Offering alternatives to a customer. In a cafe or restaurant, sometimes a customer will ask for something that's not available. Here's a good way to respond. Sorry, we no have. I'm sorry, we don't have that right now. Would you like to try something else? This is a polite and professional way to offer another option. 3. Asking someone to repeat themselves. If you don't understand someone, don't panic. Here are 2 good phrases you can use. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that more slowly? I just want to make sure I got that right. Could you explain it again? These phrases show that you are trying to understand without feeling embarrassed. 4. The most important lesson: confidence. At the beginning of the story, Mark was nervous about speaking English. But by the end, he realized that confidence is the key. Even if your English isn't perfect, speaking with confidence helps people understand you better. So remember, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Keep practicing, and you will improve. If you enjoyed this story and learned something new, leave a comment. What was the most useful phrase for you? Have you ever been in a similar situation trying to speak English? Share your experience. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that will help you learn English in a fun and easy way. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos. Let's learn together.